Welcome back to the Gains for Girls podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you check us out at OutKick.com. Anywhere where you get your podcasts, be sure to check us out on Fox Nation now because they are airing my show, other OutKick shows. And again, you can find that at FoxNation.com. We talk a lot about the insanity that is happening around the country as it pertains specifically to the gender ideology movement. But as you know, as I know, there are so many other issues, really cultural chaos that is plaguing this country. And so today's guest, that is Sara Carter. She is a reporter. She is an investigative journalist. She's incredible is what she is. She's reported on a range of stories, including national security, terrorism, immigration. She's delivered frontline coverage of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Her work along the U.S.-Mexico border is really, as of recently, what has paved a new path in national security-related stories in the region. But as you know, it's not just Texas that's being affected. It's the entire nation. Her investigations have uncovered secret tunnel systems and the narcotics trafficking routes and the involvement of Mexican federal officials in the drug trade. I believe she spent nearly a decade covering the war in Afghanistan, other Middle Eastern countries. She also has a new podcast that has just come out. It is called Dark Wars, The Border, and she conducts an in-depth investigation to expose what you're not being told about and what's happening, again, at our 2,000-mile long border with Mexico. And so I'm super duper excited to talk to her about the harm that we are seeing that affects you and me. So check out the interview here with Sara Carter. Well, Sara, thank you so much for joining the Gains for Girls podcast. I think talking to you is timely considering everything we have going on, whether it's immigration, whether it's what's happening in the Middle East. You are the voice that the people need to hear. And so I wanted to ask you first to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Riley, first for having me on your podcast. It's amazing. I think everything that you're doing to fight for young women, older women. My daughter, who's our youngest, who's 11, is incredible. She, by the way, says hello. She's a big fan. Oh. So thank you for fighting for us. And, God sometimes leads us in directions that are unexpected. I mean, I'm sure, when you took this course, started out swimming and everything, you didn't think like, oh man, I'm going to be fighting for women's rights, in the modern day, against men that want to compete against us in sports. My life kind of took twists and turns like that too. I've been a journalist for over 20 years now. I'm an investigative columnist. I definitely have an opinion now. So I'm kind of like you. I was kind of forced out into my opinion because the insanity of the world that we live in. And I loved my career. I've covered the border for over 20 years. I've been back and forth on the U.S.-Mexico border, southern border. I've been inside Central America, Mexico, covering the plight not only of our children and what we have faced as a nation because of the insanity at the border, especially under the Biden administration, but, what the humanitarian crisis that illegal immigration creates. And the fact that we still have modern day slavery is astounding to me. The fact that children are still being taken and put into situations like we saw even with the New York Times. I know I don't always brag about the New York Times. This story was actually fantastic. But like with the New York Times story, with the children working in the slaughterhouses and children being taken, organ harvesting. My God, I could go on and on with the horrors of what we've seen with the wide open border. So that's been a good portion of my career. I also covered the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. I spent a lot of time and I grew up in the Middle East. So I was very familiar with the Middle East. I wasn't as familiar with South Asia, but it felt comfortable for me. So when I went to Afghanistan, it was certainly a place where I think it changed my life. Being on, the battlefield with our troops on the front line, both men and women, who were there fighting against terrorism. And look, we're still fighting that same war today. We are still fighting that same war today. I moved to Texas from Washington, D.C. I'm sorry, D.C. I know I love the whole D.C., Virginia area. Love the changes of season. Did not really like some of the people. I'm just going to be honest. I had to deal with a lot of Dems, and my husband and I were kind of tired of the whole thing. He retired, and we decided, you know what? Let's move to Texas. This is home. It's real. We barbecue. We drink beer.
That's how God intended it to be.
Right.
No, I'm sure in DC you had to deal, of course, with Democrats, but you had to deal with people who have an R by their name, who are sometimes our own worst enemies. So it's like the most horrible concoction of people.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, you could deal with like a Democrat or a complete liberal progressive and be just like, wow, you're wacky. I can't believe that you would believe that. I was talking about that last night, actually, at the event I was at with some folks, just saying like, are people really seeing what's going on in our world? It's like evil right before our face. And then people are walking by like, oh, that's normal. No, it's not normal. But when you have rhinos, when you have Republicans in name only, and I could throw some out like Liz Cheney, but no,
who just endorsed Kamala.
Who just, yes, exactly. I don't understand it because regardless of how you feel about President Trump, he stands for those values that you say are so intrinsic to our nation. I mean, I don't understand it at all because he fights for those values, those principles that were the founding fathers. I mean, our ability, our freedom, our independence, our republic. We're a republic of states. You know, we've given states back their power. We have, you know, he fights for women's rights. He's somebody who is going to defend our sovereignty. And that to me is something worth fighting for. You know, my husband lost his eyesight in Afghanistan. He was wounded on the battlefield. We both that's where I met him. You know, I was covering the war. He was fighting the war. And it was like the most I can't even begin to describe it, the most surreal moment in my life. Like getting that phone call. I was getting ready to head to Afghanistan 3 days after I got this phone call. So I never ended up going. I get a phone call from my husband and he says, you know, baby, I got dinged up a little bit. And I was like, oh, this is, and it sure was. I mean, because the doctor got on the phone and said, we've got to take him into surgery in Bagram. He may not make it. He did make it by the grace of God, but you know, he lost his eyesight. So he's been completely, totally blind since 2011. So that sacrifice is huge. It's huge. We lost friends, you know, all because they fought for our nation. They fought for those founding principles. And I don't get it when someone like, you know, Liz Cheney, I don't have anything against her. I don't hate her. I'm not a hater, but I just can't fathom like why that's okay. Why would you? She called her a progressive. She called her the most, you know, she called Kamala the most radical person in the Senate, is now going to turn around and give her vote to her. Well, and that I don't understand.
It's a question worth asking. You know, why? Yeah. Really, why? From your perspective, and maybe you have some insight into this, is something like that driven by money? Is it driven by power? Because I think the American people, your everyday person who maybe doesn't have the greatest understanding of the political sphere, of civics in general, really, I don't know if they understand a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that goes on, whether it's things like that, or whether it's involving ourselves in war at all. And so right. Do you have some insight to share?
You know, I do. I think I do think it's driven by power. I think that, you know, someone like President Trump rocked a major boat in this nation. It was Washington, D.C. It really is a swamp. I think people have become so enamored by themselves. They're so narcissistic,
right,
that they think they know what's best for everyone else in the country, that they've stopped listening to the American people. And it's unfortunate, but it's dangerous. It's very dangerous because they are attempting to rob us of those fundamental rights that we have been endowed with by God's grace, and then of course by our nation's founding fathers, which I don't, I think there has to come a point where you self-realize, where you're like, okay, TDS, way too much. But it goes far beyond just TDS. I mean, they do have Trump derangement syndrome, but it goes far beyond that. It goes to the point where it's about their power and about them obtaining that power and retaining that power and holding that power. And anybody who's going to come in and lift the veil, the great and powerful Oz is not really that great and powerful. A friend of mine told me he's like a little guy, maybe back there on a little scooter running around like an insane maniac, and that's kind of like what Washington, D.C. is. It's being run by the insane, and it's driving our nation off a cliff. And we're on the edge of this cliff now. And last night, talking to everyone at this event that I was at, in Houston, it was just kind of a remarkable place where, you see that there's Americans out there, so many American people that are fighting for the same thing you're fighting for, same thing I'm fighting for. We don't realize we're all there. There's more of us than there are of them. And I got to tell you, we are the cavalry, right? If we don't stand up and speak out the way you did, the way others have, we're going to lose our country. And, 78-year-old president right now, President Trump, doesn't really, and everyone says this, I'm just repeating, he doesn't really need to be out there, fighting this fight. He could be golfing and just enjoying his time, hanging out with his wife, with his kids, enjoying just life. But he's fighting the fight because he understands, I think full well, the battle that we're up against. And that battle is fierce. I mean, it wants to rob our daughters of their right to play sports. It wants to rob our children of their own real, true identities. It empowers parents to turn their kids into something that they're not, because the parents think that they're going to be in the in crowd and be hip and, have an Instagram channel where they can brag about being so accepting and awesome, and look at me, and my son wants to be a little girl and my daughter wants to be a little boy. It is mutilation of our children, which is crazy, insane to me. I mean, make your own decisions as an adult. That's fine. But give your children a chance to be kids. Right. And so the answer is pure and simple. Yes, they are in a law. I said it very long because I talk a lot. But it is about power, and it's about money and retaining that power. And look at all these congressional members that come into Congress with like 10 grand in their savings account, maybe even like $1,000. And then they leave with millions of dollars later. I'm like, where'd that all come from? I want to be in Congress.
Yeah. And to your point, I think President Trump is the only politician, if we can even call him that, who has actually decreased in value since entering into that sphere. So again, just to reiterate, he doesn't have to be doing this at all. But you mentioned the border. I want to get back to Afghanistan in a minute and ask you a couple things. But in speaking about the border, spending a lot of time at the U.S.-Mexico border, what are some of the most alarming things that you have seen, that you have discovered, whether it's with border patrol agents, whether it's with these cartels? What are some of the most alarming things you've seen?
Oh my gosh, I've seen people on the verge of death, massive dehydration. I think the most alarming things I've seen have been children, young girls who I've encountered at the border that have, broken down because they've been violated. That's what they say, Violada. If I've talked to them, have to send them to border patrol because they need to be medically checked because they've been raped. Little children traveling on their own, and God only knows what has happened to them. I've seen dead bodies, people who have been lost in the Rio Grande Valley, and have succumbed to the elements. It's a humanitarian crisis. In fact, the United Nations has basically called out our land crossing as one of the most dangerous land crossings in the entire planet. I mean, if you think about it, the cartels control both sides of the border to a large extent. The cartels have outmanned, out-resourced our border patrol and our police force. They are hundreds of billions of dollars in organizations. Their power is enormous and they're brutal. They have killed with impunity. I mean, the types of deaths, the way that they kill is beyond human. It's so evil that there's no description for it. I've worked with the DEA, on the backside, especially as an investigative journalist, and have seen, and I won't go into describe details, but I've actually seen pictures, video of some of these killings. And in one case, I never forgot because the brutality was so beyond normal. There was a child, and I'll never forget this. And it was because one of the DEA agents was like, "Why are you going into Nuevo Laredo? Why are you you're going into like the lion's den, you might not come back alive." So he shared with me some pictures of what actually happened to a family. And it was a man who had apparently turned on the cartel and had been, I guess, giving the U.S. information. So they found out, they called him a rat for ratting him out. But they took this man's 2-year-old child. They tortured the 2-year-old child and then left the child in pieces. Then they raped his wife and then cut her up into pieces and made him watch.
Oh
and then they finished him off. These are the kind of people that we're dealing with. This is the wide open border that Biden and Harris have given to us, right? Which is why the Venezuelan gangs, Tren de Aragua, are in Colorado now, shaking people down and pointing guns at people. It's why that poor young girl, Jocelyn Ngari, here in Houston, only a few hours from me, was brutally killed and raped. God only knows what she went through in the last moments of her life. She was 12 years old. It's the reason why poor children coming from the mountains of Guatemala and, it's the reason why I did the Dark Wars podcast. It's the reason why for 20 years I keep talking about this and I keep thinking it's going to get better, Riley, and it's gotten worse. 20 years ago, I was reporting on these things, but they were so minor compared to now, in a way, because I thought we would wake up and just be like, okay, yeah, of course. And it was only President Trump. That's why this is why I've been so outspoken, because I see how they've targeted him. But because I can tell you for 100% certainty, that the only president, Republican, and I'm not here to, I don't hang out with Trump. We're not like hanging out every day. Thank you so much, President Trump, for throwing me shout outs when I was like covering the Russia hoax and everything. But everybody knows that I do my work. I just do my work and I tell the truth. But the only person that actually cared about the American people and the poor people that were coming across that border was President Trump. Nobody else did what he did. And I got to tell you, I've never seen the horrors that I've seen except at that border. And I've seen them. I've been to Central America multiple times this year. I've interviewed human smugglers. I've crossed that border. I've been more terrified in Mexico than on the battlefield of Afghanistan. That should tell you something.
Wow. Yeah. No, and you mentioned your podcast, Dark Wars. I encourage everyone to watch it. I saw the latest episode. I believe it was called Invasion by Invitation. Yeah. But what this exposed was how it's our taxpayer dollars as Americans. We're funding the border crisis through our own government. And you mentioned the United Nations, right, which spends billions of dollars through NGOs, different things to facilitate the transportation of migrants from all over the world to and through our southern border. And so that's something I wanted to ask you to just reiterate. It is us who is paying for this. That's correct, right?
Yes. To a large extent, we are paying for and facilitating human trafficking, human slavery, child abduction, and the most horrible scenarios you can imagine when it comes to children. We've lost children in our nation. I know people have probably heard about this who listen to your podcast. Maybe you haven't, but like the Inspector General's report that showed that over of the 500,000 roughly children, and I think it's even more than that have come into this country since the Biden administration, those are unaccompanied minors, minors without family who have traveled here alone under the age of 18. A lot of them very, very young, 12 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old, that we have literally misplaced over 300,000 of them. And 32,000 for sure. We have no idea where they've ended up. Like, how does a nation in our position do something like this? How is this even possible? And yes, and we are facilitating that. So we've become the human trafficker, and we've aided and abetted the cartels in making billions of dollars as well. And that money is like a laundry machine. It's a lot being laundered through these NGOs. Now, there are some NGOs where I truly believe there are good Christians, good people that want to do their best. They want to save lives. They want to help children. But the majority of these major NGOs are out there, facilitating this because they are assisting the cartels in bringing people here. It's like a migration factory, right? And it just keeps going and going and it doesn't end. And, this is a globalist agenda. This is what the UN wants. The United Nations pushes for this. Look at what's happening in Europe. Look at what's happening in Great Britain because of constant migration without assimilation. And I want people to understand this. Constant migration without assimilation. When people don't have and groups don't have the time to assimilate to a nation, they kind of form their own little nation within, right? Or you don't really have the resources to take care of the people that continuously flow in. So it's chaos. And not only is it chaos, but you've robbed the people that have come to the country of their ability to be able to defend themselves because now they're here illegally and they can be abused. They can be taken advantage of. It's just, there's nothing redeeming about this. There is nothing redeeming about this. And yeah, this is a UN policy. It's being pushed by the radical left. I think they're on a mission to break our nation. And I think they're on a mission to divide us and so that we break each other. And sadly, they are using people that have a lot of the men that are coming in here. There's a lot, I believe, weaponized migration. I believe that we see that from Venezuela, people coming out of the prisons, bad guys. That I think our enemies have taken full advantage of under this administration. Now, there are people that have come here that have been manipulated and lied to. They're poor. They're looking for work. They're with their families. It's still wrong because they are going to be left abandoned in our country. And, but they're trying to divide us against them too. It's a mess all the way around.
Yeah. You mentioned the word mission, which it's interesting. I would have never, before really immersing myself into this space, and really before Elon Musk bought Twitter, or X now, I would have never believed that. I would have never believed that we have seemingly an entire political party, at least in terms of elected representation, whose mission it is to destroy America. That's what this feels like. It feels like the planned and controlled destruction of America. You mentioned, we've talked about the national security threat. We've talked about the different effects with human trafficking. But what about even the fentanyl crisis that's happening at the southern border?
Oh, it's one of the biggest crises facing our nation right now. Over 100,000, people a year, mostly our children, facing like imminent death, being killed, being poisoned. They're not addicts. I just want everybody to understand. And for all of you out there who are like, well, why did they take a pill? Or why did they go to a party and use drugs? Well, people are not very smart all the time when they're younger. They make a lot of mistakes. I was talking to, I'm actually having an event in Mission, Texas on October 4th. The ladies will probably be happy that I said this. It's with Texas Against Fentanyl. And it's families that have literally lost their children. Their children have died because they took a Percocet and had no idea that it was pure fentanyl. And they find their son in their bedroom dead. I talked to a father recently who lost his child, and he got a call just a couple of weeks ago from the police, and they said, "Hey, can you come down here? We have an incident. One of the guys in our community just found his daughter and her best friend dead in their bedroom, which is 15 and 16 years old."
Well, I remember at the RNC, even there was a mom who spoke about her son. I believe his name was Weston.
Yes.
And I cried when she cried. I mean, it's the most heartbreaking, tragic, but preventable scenario I think a parent could possibly imagine.
Well, it's because you wish you could have done something. You wish you could have said something. You wish you could have stopped them, and I do know her. She was amazing. I remember I met her just like a couple of weeks before she spoke at the RNC. We were at a march in Washington, D.C. Against fentanyl. So it was Lost Voices of Fentanyl. So this is affecting people. It affected me. One of my son's best friends from high school died shortly after high school. And Joe, and he lost his life. He took a pill and it was laced with fentanyl. It's happened twice to our family. And another one was Tripper. He passed away. He was my son-in-law's really good friend, graduated law school, passed the bar, super excited about starting his life, went to a party in Miami. And by the way, I heard that they all tested tested whatever they were using. I can't even remember what it was, but they were at a party and there's these test strips and you're supposed to be able to test the pills or you could test whatever drugs and it's supposed to detect fentanyl. It did not work. So I just want to put a big warning out there for all of you out there. This is not about being a nerd. This is about your life. They are lacing these drugs with fentanyl, and these are not chemists. These are people that have no idea what they're doing, and they're mixing it up in some warehouse somewhere, and it is literally killing people instantly. Narcan will not bring you back. So just so you know, there's mezzanines out there. You won't even be able to bring people back even with Narcan if that's in the drugs. So it is a big warning. And look, Riley, I mean, our enemies are taking advantage of this. You brought up what I said, national security. I covered the war. If I was China's moving a lot of these precursor chemicals to Mexico. The cartels are moving them into the United States. We have a nation of addicts we've got to deal with. We've got a nation of young people that really like to party and have fun, and we've got to figure that out too. There's other ways of having a good time, but we have enemies out there that are saying, wow, we could really take advantage of this. And they are. And they're lacing our drugs with fentanyl and they're killing our children. And not only that, and you would know this as an athlete, but I mean, they're damaging their bodies. So even if you survive and you get Narcan and you survive, there's a lot of kids out there that have brain damage and who have physical ailments for the rest of their lives that we're going to have to take care of. So that's a big deal too. I mean, yeah, it's hopeful though, because we're waking up, I don't want to sound like that. I feel like I'm like the biggest downer right now, but I'm not. I just want us to fight back, and say like, okay, our eyes are open. What do we need to do to win back our nation?
Of course. And unfortunately, which we've said this many times on this show, it takes tragic scenarios. It takes some of the most unthinkable, unimaginable things happening before people are woken up, whether that's on the topic of national security or anything for that matter.
Or fentanyl, because I just want to make clear, this is not about addicts. Any one of our children could end up dying from this. So, I mean, we have to be there to support, the parents that have lost their children and give them like kudos for after suffering like the worst loss any human being could ever suffer, which would be the loss of a child, that they want to stand up and then fight for our children so that our children can live. That's pretty awesome.
Of course. Yeah. I want to get back to Afghanistan really quick because I have to get your take on this. At the RNC, the night when President Trump spoke, of course, this was his, first big appearance after being, having an assassination attempt.
Right.
I got the pleasure, the highest honor of sitting next to the Gold Star families. These were some of the most incredible, awesome, down-to-earth people you could possibly imagine. Again, suffered some really horrible things that no family should have to go through. But nonetheless, these families were incredible. I saw the news recently. You have these left-wing outlets who said that President Trump was politicizing the 13 U.S. service members who tragically died due to the Afghanistan withdrawal. The media said that Trump was politicizing their deaths by being at Arlington Cemetery on the anniversary. I've got to get your take on this because in speaking with the families who have come out even since on Fox News, I know President Trump posted several videos of these families on X and Truth Social. Clearly, that's not what happened. And so I guess the question more so is your perspective on media and government transparency.
Yeah, that's all great questions. Media has failed miserably. It's the main reason why I became so outspoken and decided, after all those years of being like the true blue journalist, going out there. And I was a writer, working at the Los Angeles newspaper group all the way up to the Washington Times and Washington Examiner. I decided I would speak out because I was disgusted. It absolutely was disgusting to me how the media was so in bed with Washington, D.C. and and they became elitists. They became enablers of the power base in Washington. They were no longer, the watchdog for the most part. These media agencies were aiding and abetting the Democratic Party, and they continue to do so, and all their horrific policies that are destroying our nation. But as far as President Trump is concerned, I am the wife of a wounded veteran. I have friends who have lost their husbands. And in fact, this weekend, I will be in Salt Lake City. Our family has a foundation, my stepdaughter and her in-laws, Warrior Risen. It's a huge ranch where we bring Gold Star families and first responders and, they do such amazing work and retreats with them. And I got to tell you, President Trump is our hero. And going there and showing such beautiful respect and honor for those that died in Afghanistan. Please, yes, I would love to see him there every year. That's where my husband wants to be buried. We would welcome anyone. And I hope I'm with him at his side one day, there. I don't want to think about it very much in the future. But we had friends, we lost friends, on the battlefield. Friends that I know loved President Trump, friends that are buried there. And I got to tell you, the shame is on President Biden and Kamala Harris, who withdrew from Afghanistan, a place I know very well, handed over all the power to the Taliban before removing our troops from that region and our allies. And not holding fort, not giving a lily pad base, giving up Bagram to this terrorist organization that has allowed, by the way, Al-Qaeda. When we left, I think there were, and I was talking to someone about this the other day, about maybe 8 training camps that they thought of Al-Qaeda training camps in Afghanistan. Right now, there's over 50 Al-Qaeda training bases in Afghanistan. We not only lost wonderful, beautiful young troops that day at Abbey Gate. We lost civilians. We lost allies. It was a shock. It was a loss to the spirit of the men and women who actually fought in that battle for 20 years, America's longest war, who gave everything. It was so gut-wrenching that day. I'll never forget it. And I was there was Senator Tom Cotton's office. We were trying to get people out for weeks, especially right when it all went down. And Mike Garcia's office, Congressman Mike Garcia, was amazing during that time. But that was when my husband was like, I'm done. I've got to retire. I cannot fathom what just happened. So the people that should be ashamed should be President Biden and Kamala Harris and their administration that literally allowed our men and women to die. I mean, needlessly. It should have never happened. We should have retained that city until people were evac'd who should have never handed over lists. We handed over lists of our allies to the Taliban. There has never been a time in our history where I've been more ashamed than that day. And there's probably been very few times in my lifetime where I've been so proud of what somebody else has done, like the way I felt when I saw President Trump at Arlington. Just so proud of him and so proud of the fact that he stood his ground on those hollow grounds where those men and women who've given everything for our nation to protect our country, and everything that we stand for, where he stood there and showed them that kind of respect. God bless him for that.
Well, I totally agree. And you're right in saying, look, it's our future. It's your daughter's future. That's at stake here. And so I so appreciate you. Again, how can we support you? How can we follow along the work that you're doing? Please tell us really quickly, too, about Dark Wars, The Border, your new podcast series, and tell us where we can find it and watch it.
Yeah, go to darkwarspod.com. You can get all 4 episodes there or wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And I take you through not only, it's not me just telling the story. I have interviewed, I would say maybe roughly 100 people. I mean, the experts in the field, people that have been on the ground, people who are working in the government, people who are fighting the fight, whistleblowers, pulling out all the information we possibly can on Dark Wars Pod. And it's 4 series, 4 episodes that will take you in to this problem, and it will educate you the way no other series has. I mean, and I am telling you, thank you, everyone out there for helping me put this together, who has been a part of this podcast series. And you can find me as well at saracarter.com or, on X. I'm so excited. I love Elon Musk. I think it's so great that we have like freedom of speech there for as long as we can keep it. I'm just like freedom of speech, able to, share each other's stories and get in trouble by putting out crazy X tweets, or whatever, X posts. And, so you can follow me at Sara Carter DC on X. Thank you so much, Riley, for having me on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're the best. Again, everyone go to Dark Wars Pod. You'll learn about how this crisis touches every single American across the country, not just people in Texas, not just people in border states. It affects every single American. And as you heard, not just the next 4 years, the future of this nation is on the line. But because of people like Sara, we are being adequately informed, but it's up to us to do our job. So thank you. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you so much, Riley. You too. Keep up the fight.
Thank you guys for watching the Gains for Girls podcast. Again, check us out at OutKick.com. You can subscribe. Be sure to share these episodes with your friends, people who you think need to hear these. Share this with your favorite liberal, if you have one of those. Again, check out Dark Wars Pod to listen to Sara Carter's 4-episode, very brief 4 episodes, investigative work into what is happening at the U.S.-Mexico border. Really, really important stuff. This November, this nation's security is on the line. Your children's future is on the line. So be sure to watch that. Again, spread that as well. And we will see you guys again next week. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching. The fight to save women's sports and restore common sense is far from over, and I continue the conversation every week. So make sure to catch more content over here and subscribe to OutKick so you don't miss a thing.